Okay. Okay. Let me share a presentation with you guys. So we are the NUS Political Science Society. We are the organizer of this event, 90% deconstructing the Singapore General Election 2020. Before that, I would like to ask everybody here, NUS students, to sign up for our NUS PSOC membership if you would like to join us and participate in more of these events. You can scan the QR code on the screen or type in your browser bit.ly/PSOC. Yeah. And during the event, if you have any questions you would like to ask the editor, you can put it on the Zoom chat. Yeah. After the whole event, when you want to, if you would like to respond to any of the points that have been raised during the event, you can you can scan the QR code here for the instructions to sending letters to the editor. Yeah. And we wish you an informative session with us at 90%. To submit your letters, you can submit it at publications@nuspsoc.org. And for any inquiries about census, you can email me at events@nuspsoc.org. With that said, I would now hand my time over to Prof. Walid. You may begin speaking about the opposition in Singapore and present your research. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Winston, and thank you to the Political Science Society for inviting me. And I'm a bit nervous because my guru, Professor Bilver Singh, is in the audience, so I have to be at my very best. Okay, so I will talk about the opposition coalition and probably share some of my own postulations. And I will basically talk about three main things today. The first is the prospect of an opposition coalition, to what end? Right? And second is the comparison with Malaysia that gets a lot of people excited, rightly or wrongly. A lot of people are excited, and the talk about opposition coalition a lot of times is based on what we witness in Malaysia. And the third is the focus on personalities that Singaporeans and analysts, myself included, tend to do, where it may not necessarily always be the most productive way of looking at things. Okay, so let me begin. The first is, when we talk about opposition coalition, the first thing, and the media always asks, why is there not an opposition coalition? Singaporeans always ask, why is there not an opposition coalition? Meaning the Workers' Party, the SDP, the PSP, all the parties get together and contest under one ticket or one banner. And my response is, to what end? Opposition coalitions are supposed to serve a purpose. So to what end? If the end is to beat the PAP, at the moment, there is not much of a possibility of this happening. Which is why we do not actually see an opposition coalition. Because the possibility of unseating, the probability of unseating the PAP is extremely low. As it is now, the PAP holds almost 90% of the seats in parliament. And that's astonishing, right? And not astonishing by Singapore standards, but by international standards. And it's very difficult to talk about, or very difficult to imagine an opposition coalition under such dominance of the PAP. Then the second, somebody would say, oh, okay, maybe there's no possibility of winning at the moment, or there's a very low probability. But a coalition would project opposition strength. And my response would be, would it actually project opposition strength? Wouldn't it basically project strength for the smaller parties, but not for the larger parties like Workers' Party or SDP or PSP? So not all opposition parties are equal. The Workers' Party, I would say there are three main groups of opposition parties. The Workers' Party by itself, the second is PSP and SDP, and the third, the rest of the class. And for me, the rest of the class, the Reform Party, the Red Dot, and the NSP, they are the ones who would benefit from an opposition coalition. The Workers' Party would not benefit from an opposition coalition at this point in time. In fact, its brand would be diluted. Therefore, it doesn't make any rational sense for the Workers' Party to be in an alliance with the NSP or the Reform Party. And you look at who's moving all the talk of an opposition coalition. It's the smaller parties, not the larger parties. So it's very rational for the Workers' Party to not be in a coalition with the third group. Now, what about the second group? The SDP and the PSP. The Workers' Party and the SDP are ideologically different. In fact, if I were to be a bit provocative and a bit naughty, I would say the WP is more likely to be an ideologically, okay, just in terms of ideology, it's more likely to be in an alliance with the PAP than with the SDP. The SDP is a very clearly defined left-leaning party, whereas the Workers' Party is not. The Workers' Party is not ideologically as left as the SDP is. The WP is closer to the PAP than it is to the SDP. Therefore, I do not see an alliance based on ideology happening on that. Now, the closest one would be PSP. Because PSP, honestly, I don't really know what they stand for. And I don't mean this as an insult. I just think that they are not well defined at the moment, other than being a Tan Cheng Bock party. I foresee if something were to happen, I would see more cooperation between PSP and WP. So cooperation in terms of WP maybe saying I'm contesting here and other parties not contesting there to avoid three-cornered fights. That is very likely. In fact, that has already happened. But entering a formal alliance, I do not foresee it happening any time soon. Because firstly, the parties are different. They stand for different things. But secondly, more importantly, there is no real prospect of unseating the PAP. If there is a real prospect of unseating the PAP, then the ideological disparity doesn't matter that much, because politics is ultimately the art of the possible. Now, that's the first thing, the first point that I wanted to make. The second point is the comparison to Malaysia. And the comparisons to Malaysia, while interesting, while fascinating, I think are ultimately misplaced for a few reasons. One, Malaysia had Dr. Mahathir as a defector. And for those who are not familiar with Malaysian politics, right, the equivalent of Dr. Mahathir in Malaysia is Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. There's no other equivalent. Not even Lee Hsien Loong, not Tharman. The closest you would say the defector may be like someone like Goh Chok Tong or Tharman defecting. But even then, that's not at the same level as Mahathir. It's not. So for those who do not understand Malaysian politics, they may think, oh, Tan Cheng Bock is also a defector. But Tan Cheng Bock is not Mahathir. He's not. Tan Cheng Bock was never even a minister. Now, is Tan Cheng Bock a significant defector? He is. But is he as significant as Mahathir? No, by no means at all. In fact, it wasn't just Mahathir who defected, right? If you look at the opposition, they had Muhyiddin, who is currently the prime minister. He defected. He was a deputy prime minister. You had Shafi'i Abdal, who was the vice president of UMNO, who defected as well. And you had Mukhriz Mahathir, who was the chief minister of Kedah, who defected as well. And even before that, you had Anwar Ibrahim, a former deputy prime minister who defected. You do not have the same level of defections. Now, why is that important? Because because in a country that has only been ruled by one party, which was the case in Malaysia until 2018 and is the case in Singapore, there's no way for the opposition to have had experience governing at the federal level. At the state level, yes, for Malaysia. But for Singapore, there's none. So it's a bit like you guys when you apply for your first job, right? Oh, we like your credentials, but we're not going to give you the job because you don't have experience. But if you don't give you the job, people don't give you the job, you'll never get the experience, right? So the opposition is in that bind. Oh, we like the candidates, but you don't have experience governing. But they'll never ever govern if people think like that. So how do they overcome that? By having high-level, credible defectors. To show that, don't worry, we have people who have had experience governing, so the country is in good hands. And we just do not have that at the same level in Singapore. Now, if we had, for instance, hypothetically, a Tharman or Goh Chok Tong defecting, then maybe you would see more defections going to the opposition. But at the moment, it's a fantasy. That's not likely to happen anytime soon. Secondly, for Malaysia, the progress for the opposition was gradual. It wasn't a one-time thing from zero to unseating the government. in 2008. So 2004, the Barisan National Government, at that point in time, the UMNO-led Barisan National Government got about 90% of seats, which was huge. But in 2008, they lost the two-thirds majority. In 2013, they lost the popular vote, but they retained the government because of the first past the post system. And in 2018, they lost they lost power. So it was a very gradual step. It was a gradual process. In Singapore, we are nowhere near that. So the more success you see for the opposition, the more likely it is for opposition coalitions to form. And because in Singapore, we are so far away from that, I think it's very premature to talk about opposition coalitions. And that would explain why we do not see them. And this brings me to my third point. So the first point was opposition coalitions to what end? Ideologically and just in terms of winning. The second was comparisons with Malaysia, which I think are not really accurate. And the third is a focus on personalities. Often, and you know, the media and a lot of Singaporeans always fall for this. We always talk about, oh, if only the opposition personalities were not egoistic, they would be able to form a coalition. And how many times have you heard that, right? They are all so egoistic. Firstly, is the nature of politics that you would attract people with egos. Secondly, is the nature of opposition politics that you would attract people with egos. But thirdly, everybody has egos. That doesn't mean just because you're egoistic, you would not be entering into a coalition with another person. Do you really think Kenneth Jayaratnam and Goh Meng Singh's egos are larger than Mahathir Mohamad and Anwar Ibrahim? It's impossible. It's impossible, right? But Anwar Ibrahim and Mahathir Mohamad, who hate each other more than anybody else hate each other in Malaysia or in the world possibly, right? The fella literally was jailed by Mahathir, and yet they were able to enter into a coalition, a formal coalition. Means that Kenneth Jayaratnam and Goh Meng Singh could hypothetically enter in a, or Kenneth Jayaratnam and Pritam Singh could, but because the rational calculations do not encourage that, at least on the part of the bigger parties. What I want to say is we should look beyond personalities when we are analyzing Singapore politics. Yes, personalities matter for sure. They matter a lot. Personalities matter a lot. But personalities are not the be all and all. We need to look at institutions. We need to look at rational calculations. And there is a tendency to portray people like Kenneth Jayaratnam, Goh Meng Singh, or other opposition figures, which, colorful as they are, I don't think they are irrational. And I don't think we should portray the opposition as opposition personalities as subhuman or irrational actors, because as I said, politics is the art of the possible. If the conditions are conducive and permit, you will see an opposition coalition. At the moment, I do not see that happening because of whatever I've said. So those are the three main points I wanted to say, and I'll be happy to take any questions or comments later on.
Okay, can we have Prof. Vilvia to present your ideas and opinions to the audience? Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost, I must say I salute a wonderful colleague, Professor Walid. I've seen him grow and grow and grow, and he brings great pride. I've also seen Pritam Singh grow and grow and grow. So nice to have students who have been here and they are growing, and today they are national icons. So that's one. So thank you for what Walid has said. I totally agree with Dr. Walid, what he just said. I think yesterday this issue also came up about the place of opposition in Singapore. I used a football league analogy. Dr. Walid used another analogy. I think he went further than most of us. I just like to add one small thing, which actually sometimes we often forget. One, the one-party dominant state in Singapore today was once an opposition party, the PAP. And how did that opposition party transform itself into a Hercules, a political Hercules from 1955 and 59 and 59 till today, I think is something worth a lesson, worth learning, and something which everybody can learn in terms, and especially the opposition parties in Singapore. And this brings me actually to point 2, which is actually equally interesting. And often sometimes we forget. And this is the role of opposition in Singapore's history. Okay, the Barisan was born out of the PAP in a split. Okay, so much so that probably the most active opposition party in Singapore has been the Barisan in Singapore's short history, and especially the period from 1961 after the 63 election until about 66, 67, when they made, to me, a strategic blunder, and from which it have never recovered. Parts of the Barisan is today found in the Workers' Party. So what did the Barisan did, and why did he do, and so on and so forth, I think lessons worth learning again, because the moment you are in a position in Parliament and then you abandon it, it's very hard to come back again. And we would have thought that that was the last of all the lessons. Lo and behold, the SDP, after winning 4 seats in 91, they repeated almost the same thing again. This politics of fratricide, as the writer of this book has written. So I think history is interesting as far as the opposition is concerned. So how much can we learn? The SDP have never recovered after that. The SPP, which came out of the SDP2, did for some good years, in basically through the leadership of Chiam Sitong, and then to a certain extent Lina, they held on to Potong Pasir. But because of personality-centric politics, with them gone, I think it will be a long shot for them to come back again there, unless another Chiam can come back. More important in politics, just forget about Potong Pasir. Look at what the Workers' Party is doing in Aljunied and Hougang. Once you are there, you start to dig your roots there. Once you start to develop your support base there, your own kind of culture there, it's very difficult to unroot and uproot that particular political party, including the PAP. The PAP cannot win back Aljunied. Don't talk of Hougang. Okay? So I think the lesson learned for opposition is, once you are there, I think unity is so critical. And the moment for tactical or strategic or technical reasons you abandon, it's going to be very, very uphill battle to go back. So the Barisan never recovered. It's still around in some form, but it's in the Workers' Party. The SDP have not recovered. It'll take some time. Since 91, they have never won a single seat. They came quite close all the time, but difficult. So the question is, in addition to the things which my very good friend Walid have spoken, I think when we talk about the opposition in Singapore politics, I think there are a few leaves which can actually pluck from our own short history of the opposition itself. One, where the PAP, being the most active opposition party in Parliament from 55 to 59, they were able to turn things around and become such a dominant political force, notwithstanding the fact that they suffered a split. They are still here. I mean, we can debate till the cows come home, what was it and here and there, fine. But that's one lesson. But number two, when parties decide to undertake policies which are self-destruct, you don't recover. And then the impact of that is not just on the political power and struggle for power. Remember, I mean, I'm a hard believer that politics is about the struggle for power. It is. It is not charity. They're not here because they love you or they love me. They love power and what they can do with power. Of course, in the hope of doing something for the nation. But the moment you make a mistake and you bungle, you will lose power. Is just one part of the equation. The other part of the coin is, I think when people in Singapore look at the SDP, when people look at the Barisan, they have certain views. Probably the older generation. Maybe we have forgotten. We don't even know where Barisan is. That's why I like to always remind people that the Barisan merged with the Workers' Party. And this is one of the key reasons why the Workers' Party is such an effective mobilizational party in Singapore. In fact, more effective than the PAP in many, many ways. It comes from Barisan. It is not the Workers' Party of David Marshall. Definitely not. Definitely not. But what JBJ and Dr. Lee Siew Choh got together and brought together, and eventually the power, put it in very simple terms, the English educated and the Chinese educated came together. Isn't that the PAP again of 1959? It's almost a repeat. And therefore, the Workers' Party is marching very, very slowly and forward. So I concur on all of that with Dr. Walid. But to me, I just wanted to put a footnote about history as far as these guys are concerned. And I think there's so much to learn. The question is, if we move forward with or without a coalition, what does it mean? Where are you going to repeat the mistakes of the past? Where are you going to learn? The final lesson for opposition is, how do you deal with a one-party dominant state? I think when the book about is the PAP here to stay written, actually sometimes people miss it. Probably the most important section of the book is not at the end. In the end is, normal, talk about this formula and that formula. I thought the most important section was in the preamble, where Mr. Ong Yi Kang talks about how one-party dominant state remain dominant forever, especially in small city-states. And he was talking about in cities in the United States. So what was my takeaway from him? He concluded by saying, maybe we disagree with him. He said, Singapore politics will always be dominated by one party. It don't have to be the PAP, but one party. Right? And if that's the conclusion of his, it tells us a lot about the future of the opposition. Where are they going to be? Are we waiting for a split? Are we waiting for a coalition or whatever and whatever? I think those things are worth considering. Yet, I think that formula, that the architecture of a one-party dominant state informs us of many, many things. And let's see where we're going to go from here. I think this election was a very important election in many, many ways. I think the 4G has come out in certain ways, expected and unexpected. And I think the implications are, I always talk about the triangle, what it means for the PAP, what it means for the opposition, but what it means for each or every one of them depends on the pyramid, the base, the electorate, how they are watching. The electorate is watching both sides. And I think that watching is very, very important. And events and occasions like this are extremely valuable. We are very fortunate that one, we are given the opportunity. Two, we have got very, very talented students and staff there. And I think at the end of the day, when we leave, after 5 days when we leave, I think we are going to be very, very well informed. Something you don't get out there. And for that, I salute. I salute what the students are doing and the whole event for every one of you coming on board. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we will have Nell to give a presentation. Nell.
Okay, so I think after the two profs have spoken, they have pretty much covered quite a bit. So I think on the topic of the one-party dominant state, and we should really, and as Prof. Lee said, politics is a hard struggle for power, right? So we should really look at the power dynamics that will be in the upcoming G2025, because as observed that this is a COVID election and this was supposed to be a 4G election. So therefore, why was it that the 3G actually seemed to be controlling, were the masterminds behind orchestrating this election? So it seems that in 2025, it will be most likely that it will be a referendum for the people's trust in the 4G. So on the topic of this, if we look at the other side, there is an increasingly stronger opposition, but there still remains the problem that they have not formed a coalition, and by sheer numbers alone, they cannot win the PAP. So we should look at whether opposition parties are able to overcome their differences to form a coalition in order to, whether they merge with the WP or the PSP or whatsoever, whether they are able to gather and consolidate the sheer numbers to push the PAP out of parliament, or as according to the preamble in Prof. Singh's book, And he said that, Ong Ye Kong said that one-party dominant state will always remain a one-party dominant state, whether it's the PAP or not. So we should look at the telltale signs of a turning point within the party. For example, internal infighting, as all empires are usually crumble from internal bickering. So I think that one of the ways that we can look for this sort of internal bickering is by looking at, because the PAP likes to keep a very clear and very unified public image of themselves, right? So one of these very telltale signs is that when they start to mess up or they get distracted, and they, for example, look at their publicity campaign this year. As you can tell, it was definitely not very unified. You had Heng Swee Keat being put in East Coast at the last minute, and nobody knew why he was put there or who put him there. So therefore, these are all the small signs, as you can see, or like the Ivan Lim scandal, like, come on. So these are all the small signs that you can see that it might be the telltale signs of a turning point within the party, and we should really be looking at the internal dynamics of the PAP, even though it's very hard for us as a public to see what really goes on behind the party.
Okay, thank you, Nell. So to begin the conversation, I actually have it was something that all three panelists have talked about, which is the idea of a split in the party. So the split in the party, the main party, the PAP, to form maybe another opposition party. Yeah, and that actually harkens back to the time of 1960, when the Minister of National Development, Ong Eng Guan, first mayor of Singapore also, he split with the party for obvious differences, such as his 16 resolutions, which the PAP eventually said that they were not divided on because of. He went on to form the United People's Party, who went on to dominate his Anson seat. Yeah, and also we see the same incident happening in 1981 when JPJ went over to dominate the same Anson seat. So I would just like to ask, what kind of phenomenon can occur in Singapore politics where a big minister could one day, say, I've had enough of the PAP, let's switch sides. Yeah.
Dr. Walid and
Or whoever wants to go first.
Walid, let Prof. Walid.
Oh, Prof. Yeah, Prof.
Okay, thanks. So firstly, I would like to thank Prof. Singh for his kind remarks, but I was a bit worried when he compared me to Pritam Singh. I'm not sure if he's telling me I should join the opposition. Anyway, so the question is essentially, how can a split happen? Is that the question, Winston?
Yeah, generally, how can we expect a phenomenon where a big minister, decides to one day say, hey,
right? So
switch sides.
defectors. Okay, so the reason why the PAP has largely been free of defections, largely, is because of its structure and this cadre party structure, right? And I think Prof. Singh has written a lot about this. I have written some things on this as well. Essentially, the cardinals elect the Pope selects the cardinals, right? You do not go up to say, hey, I want to be a PAP cadre. No, the party chooses you. Whereas in UMNO, at that point in time, anyone can sign up. So when it is a mass party where anyone can sign up, so that's the first thing. PAP, not everybody can sign up. The party chooses you. Secondly, in UMNO, there's a contest for the top seat. Here, there is no contest for the top seat. The leaders are selected, not elected, right? DPM Heng is selected. He's not elected by the cadres, right? You are elected to be part of the CEC, but even then you can be co-opted into the CEC. So what happens is you have ideological conformity within the party, largely. So in the sense that this is a strength and a weakness of the PAP. The strength is all of them generally think along the same lines. It generally speak the same way. So therefore, it's less likely to split. The party is less likely to split. On the other hand, it's a weakness because echo chamber and all sorts of all of the things that we already know. So I do not see a split happening along ideological lines. Now, is there still a possibility of splits happening? Of course, because ultimately there is, as Prof. Singh says, politics is the pursuit of power. As long as there are positions to be jostled for, there will be contests for power. So is there a possibility of split happening? There is, but I would say it is less likely than than other parties. And also, people would not jump ship, right, when the ship is doing well. It's only when the ship is sinking you start seeing people defecting more and more. So at the moment, I do not see that happening. I mean, it was GE 2020 was bad for the PAP by the PAP standards, right? By other standards, it's a phenomenal victory nonetheless. So it's not a sinking ship by any stretch of the imagination, which is why I do not foresee. I mean, it can happen. I'm not saying it cannot happen. It can happen because of personalities. But ultimately, because of the party structure, it is quite a close-knit party where the PM essentially can choose all 93 candidates, right? And he does choose all 93 candidates. And that's not possible in other countries where you do not have that luxury. So I do not see it happening at the moment because of the party structure and because the PAP is in a strong position.
Yeah, thank you. If I may come in, I started my career as a Soviet study of Soviet politics, study of communism. That was the main reason I was brought into NUS to become a Soviet expert. So my early years of studying Marxism, Leninism, and then I veered into Maoism. The most important thing I did was to study the CPSU, Soviet Soyuz, Communist Party of Soviet Soyuz, Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And what informs anyone who knows about that structure is Marxism, Leninism. And if you look at the PAP is very much a Marxist-Leninist party. It is. Okay, and this basically strengthens the point which made by Prof. Walid. The most powerful man is a cadre party, but the most powerful man is the Secretary General. He makes and breaks anyone. The chairman is irrelevant. The chairman is a decoration. He's decoration. He's there for decoration purposes. Always. So that was true in the Soviet Union. It's true in Singapore. I'm not saying we are a communist country. Of course, sometimes I joke that this is the most successful communist country in the world. But so the power structure is such that the prime minister is the most powerful primus inter pares position. Not just in the party, but in fact, even in the government. He controls every level or levels of power. So that's one. I think, but that itself is a plus and a minus. When you had personalities like Lee Kuan Yew, I think the impact of that was he was hated by many, but I think he was feared by even more. That fear brought in a particular kind of unity at a particular time in history, which led to what it was and what we had. Okay, he destroyed anything. He was a steamroller. He's a knuckle duster man. Anybody who opposed him will be destroyed. That was his style. And by and large, people who shaped up in the PAP with him went along and to create this little dream or paradise, which we call it. But those who disagree with him paid very dearly. I mean, don't go far. Just look at what happened to Devan Nair. His comrade in arms, the man who won the NTUC for him. And by winning the NTUC, the PAP captured power in Singapore. And look at the way he treated that man. But that's the character of that man. So one question which I want to throw up, and I think in line with what you all just said, Lee Kuan Yew is a political genius when he was running this country. But very often we forget that he ruled this country from 1959 to 1990. But from 1990 to 2015, the next 25 years, he performed a role which I think very few heads of government or head of states can do. And that kept the PAP the way it was. He was minister mentor from day one. Senior minister's job was to mentor. He mentored the young guys, older guys. He kept them in shape. Every day was lunchtime with someone or another. And that was how he kept not just the ideological unity, because of the Singapore story, which he created on his term. I think the Singapore story is actually a Lee Kuan Yew story, but still we call it Singapore story. But he kept them, the discipline, and kept everybody in line. I concur fully with what Dr. Walid have said about the party structure, about a successful Singapore, about a strong PAP. I think in any political organism, there will be personality difference. They were during Lee Kuan Yew's time. You think Rajaratnam agreed everything with him, or Goh Keng Swee or Toh Chin Chye? No, never. There were differences, but they kept their differences within limits, and they moved on. In fact, the later part of Rajaratnam and Goh Keng Swee and Toh Chin Chye's life, you see the kind of remarks they made about Lee Kuan Yew and the PAP. Ong Pang Boon was so disgruntled that he's still around. He don't even want to speak about his experience in politics. Amazing. He's the first education minister of Singapore in 1959. He's still around. So they went through many things. So my point is, there was a mentor in the PAP who mentored the second generation, the third generation, and even the fourth generation to a point. Heng Swee Keat is the PPS of Lee Kuan Yew. Goh Chok Tong is not a minister mentor. I'm sorry, Lee Hsien Loong is not a minister mentor. How to mentor ministers when you have struggles within the family, the kind of struggles you have? You don't have the moral authority. Nothing, I don't want to be personal here. So who is mentoring these guys? You pluck somebody from civil service, from the military, from the PA, from an animal organization, and you put all of them together. What is the glue in the PAP today? This is what worries me as far as the PAP is concerned. Really. Ideology, I think the ideology is ideology of pragmatism and of success. Whatever works today, works. That's the PAP, by and large. Mao Zedong said you cannot bring prices of HDB down. The moment the election, they get a slap, or everything is possible after that. I mean, this is Singapore. That's the ideology of Singapore. Really. Foreigners are lifeblood of Singapore. After 2011, oh no, let's stop it. So, minister's salary cannot be reduced. The day after the results, the first announcement is minister's salary will be reduced. I mean, so that's what we are. What worries me is what is keeping the party together. I don't think you're going to see any split now. But what is happening in the 4G worries me. Really, it worries me. Will they split? I don't think so. But I think there are differences among themselves showing up in one form or another. And I think what is worse is they may not split as much as we think they are split. The public image of them being split is worse than the actual split in the PAP. Oh, that's amazing and it's terrible. I mean, I'll dare to speak. I mean, you go back to my book, whether is the PAP here to stay? It was 2 years ago when you could see telltales of messaging being so badly done within at the top leadership level. You know? And when Heng Swee Keat said, no more politicking for positions in the PAP. So I thought, what are you talking about? Who said there's politicking for positioning in the PAP? I thought it never existed. And he said, stop that politicking. There should not be any more politicking. So there was, by implication. So now, what else is there? I do not know. I mean, I think as Nell said, Walid said, we do not know what is actually going on because of the secrecy. But I think slowly and surely things are going to come out. And my small indicator is just after the election, I think today ran an article about the PAP insiders of what happened in the PAP. How the third G and the fourth G and the grassroots were all across each other. And he said, that's what happened. So if this is already beginning to surface today, the moment PM Lee is no longer there, what is the situation going to be? I don't think the PAP is about to split. It will take, I think Professor Walid is absolutely correct. Look at the way what happened, how Najib fell. It was actually a good 10 years it took. 08, 013 and 018 out we went. Similarly here, of course, Shanmugam have said after 70 years it's going to be challenging, very challenging to be in power because that's history. But I don't think they're about to split. But I think people are talking more and more of a potential, possible, probable split. Now, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, God knows. But that one thing I think we must also be very mindful of. Malaysia is very big, and it's a federal state and have many centers of powers. Royalty, military, state, federal, private sector, and so on and so forth. In Singapore, power is centralized in one center called Istana, controlled by the PAP. All we need is something in this center, something to happen here, things will unravel. So in a small city-state, as Ong Ye Kang said, when it unravels, it will unravel very fast, faster than what you and I think will happen. And the question is, we do not know how to manage this. A small little riot in Little India and the police force is Gabra. Wow, if there's a political, or whatever you want to call it in Singapore, happen, I do not know how we're going to manage it, really. So that challenge itself, because in the case of Malaysians, they are used to bringing everybody down every other day. We are not. Somebody just says something about him. Wow, there is a split. May not be a split, or because we are not used to it. So final point is, as I said, I studied the Soviet Union. And when I used to watch NATO, and my supervisor was a great scholar, Professor Jeffrey Jukes, he said, look at NATO, everyday fighting. Even de Gaulle took his soldiers out of NATO force and said it will be under French force, nuclear power in French force. So you always thought NATO is going to collapse tomorrow. But in the Warsaw Pact, silent, quiet, peaceful, lovely, not a sound, not a squeak. Who fell? Warsaw or NATO? So just because it's silent, it doesn't mean things are all okay. The danger of silence is even worse than the danger of noise. I think that's one thing I've learned in my life as far as politics of this nature is concerned. Okay, I'll stop here. Let's let the rest move on. Thank you. Wonderful questions.
Okay, Nell, do you have anything to add about this?
I'll just add something really, really quick because of course we're very effective in covering quite a lot of ground. So I think indeed the PAP is very, very similar to a Marxist-Leninist party in that the most powerful figure or man is the Secretary General. But then we should ask ourselves, like, if it is always a top-down hierarchy, then who checks the Prime Minister or who checks the Secretary General? What is the accountability? And is the Prime Minister the actual mentor, as Lee Kuan Yew was, or as Prof. Singh has mentioned, Goh Chok Tong and Lee Hsien Loong are not mentors because they have had either some sort of differences with their party or differences elsewhere. So who is actually mentoring the 4G? Is it Heng Swee Keat? And who checks the Prime Minister and makes sure that he is not letting his personal interest override the interest of the party? So is it his inner team, his inner circle, or does the Prime Minister still hold the veto vote inside his inner circle? And does that mean that selecting the wrong Prime Minister will see a public split within the PAP? So for example, what if the Deputy Prime Minister today was not Heng Swee Keat? What if it was someone else? Would we have seen a public split within the PAP, which would be very, very very clear that there's a split like it did back in the 1960s with Barisan. So I think that one way that there is a telltale sign of a turning point or a split is when we look at the Deputy Prime Ministers elected, the people who are shadowing the Prime Minister and waiting to become the next Prime Minister. It is really, this position of Deputy Prime Minister is really a telltale sign of whether the party will see a split, because as you can see, when Heng Swee Keat was first elected as Deputy Prime Minister, people like Indrani Raja came out to say, oh, this man is the best glue for the party. He works with everyone, he gets along with everyone, he has the potential to bring together everyone and lead them. But then again, that brings up the question, why is Goh Chok Tong and Lee Hsien Loong, why can't they be the mentors of the party? Does that mean that even after Lee Kuan Yew has passed away, are there still remnants of his era still around? Is the party still depending on Lee Kuan Yew to give them the glue? Because as we can recall, Heng Swee Keat was actually the parliamentary
Principal private sector.
sec of Lee Kuan Yew. So are they still depending on this mentorship of Lee Kuan Yew to bring them forward? And what if one day there is nobody else who has been personally mentored by Lee Kuan Yew? Then who then are they going to turn to for the glue in the party? Because ideological conformity, right? So I think that going forward we should really look at what the ideological conformity of the party, and also who is there to mentor them to give the party unity, because there must be someone, and it can't always be Lee Kuan Yew because he is no longer around. Yeah.
If I may just add a small footnote, if I just may add, all said and well said. I got nothing to say, just raise one small question. PM became, 2004, Lee Hsien Loong becomes Prime Minister. 06, he holds his first election. And then 06, 11, 15, 20. The promise was he's going to create the 4G. And by 2017, 2018, the 4G takes shape, takes form. And then by last year, 2019, we know very clearly that there is a Prime Minister in the waiting. That's Heng Swee Keat. And we have a group of 16 in the PAP from the 4G who played a critical role in pushing and uniting behind Heng Swee Keat. Just a question, and maybe a naughty question. What if after this GE, for whatever reasons, Heng Swee Keat is replaced by someone else, Mr. X, as the next Prime Minister in waiting? What will that symbolize? One, for the PAP in the general public. Two, for the PAP within. I have no answers, but I think it's worth just parking somewhere. It took 16 years for Lee Hsien Loong to come up with Heng Swee Keat. What would that mean for PAP? What would that mean for Singapore? And in turn, what would that mean for the future of opposition? I think these are interesting questions, no answers, but I'm just following through. I think Nell raised something, Walid, but I think let's hit the nail on the head. What if Heng Swee Keat do not become Prime Minister in 18 to 24 months? What would that mean? And someone else comes in. Wow. I stop there.
Thank you, Prof. Well, so I actually would like to draw like sort of a comparison between, since we have talked about a split in the PAP, of course we also have to bring in the opposition. That's the central theme of the episode today. I have one member of the audience who asked about the proposed opposition coalition back in 2018 not materializing. He asked about the reasons as to why it did not materialize, and it sort of brings me back to also why the SDA sort of fell apart when Chiam See Tong decided to say, hey, I am bringing SPP out of the SDA. And then he went on to dominate the scene back in 2006 and 2011 when he decided to contest in Bishan Toa Payoh GRC. So ultimately, what are the dangers of sort of splitting first within a coalition, second within an opposition party, and third, not even materializing a coalition at all? Yeah.
So if I may, I think the reasons for the coalition not materializing, I think are largely based on what I said during my earlier presentation. Firstly, personality differences, but secondly, do not forget, no matter how large the personality differences are, if there is an opportunity to unseat the PAP, you'll see a coalition. I guarantee you. It's just that because there isn't, so there isn't an incentive to overcome those personality differences. But don't forget that proposed opposition coalition didn't include WP.
Yes.
So is it really a significant opposition coalition? So the follow-up question is, how differently would GE 2020 have turned out? I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think it would have mattered. I think the fact that the WP was not in already says a lot. And the fact that it was the smaller parties agitating for it and not the larger parties, that's why it tells us a lot about the nature of opposition politics as well. Having said that, there is a loose cooperation, form of cooperation amongst the opposition parties. And that's why we only saw a couple of three-cornered fights and non-between. So whenever there was a larger party, WP, SDP, and PSP, there was no smaller party. And also because the smaller party knows voters have learned from the presidential election, they would not split their votes. All of them would go to the larger opposition party. So the smaller parties know that they would be destroyed in a three-cornered fight. That's why you didn't see three-cornered fights. And the second thing is, Tan Cheng Bock actually did try to play the role of the leader of the opposition, right? He was going around campaigning for others as if his constituency was a sure victory, which was a strange move as well. But it's not that strange if you really understood what he was trying to do, right? Which was trying to appear to show himself as the leader of the opposition, as the granddaddy of the opposition coalition. And that's why he was doing whatever he did. And when we talk about the opposition parties, right? My question is, beyond this opposition coalition, right? Where do the opposition parties go from here? The WP will be safe. The SDP, it depends on. I think the SDP actually is in a better position than the PSP, even though they don't have any seats. I think the institution can survive. In fact, they may thrive more without Chee Soon-Juan. It's not just survive. They may do better without Chee Soon-Juan. But the PSP, there are a lot of question marks. Can the PSP survive a post-Dr. Tan Cheng Bock world? What if Dr. Tan Cheng Bock contests in the presidential election and wins, and then he's no longer in the... What happens? What happens to the PSP depends, I think, largely on how the two NC MPs use their positions in parliament to make PSP a credible party. Because at the moment, honestly, I don't know what the PSP stands for, apart from being a Tan Cheng Bock party. And honestly, it was quite something. He almost took out 2 ministers, which is quite amazing for a place. And this is another question. I'll just answer that question as well. In the West, where people said that was, and I myself thought that was a sure win for the PAP, right, in the entire West. And now it leads me to rethink: has the West always been firmly in the PAP's hands because it is a PAP stronghold, or is it a PAP stronghold because there was no credible opposition party that contested in the West? Right? And now I think I have to rethink that as well. And we would need more data points. We will need 1 or 2 more elections to really tell us what is the strength of the opposition in the West vis-a-vis the PAP. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, very good intervention by Dr. Walid. I just got one small point to add about the 2018 efforts in June to create an opposition coalition. Okay, the efforts were noble, but sometimes we forget its actual impetus. The actual impetus came from Malaysia. Not only that, the actual specific trigger came from after Pakatan Harapan came to power in May. By end May, the vice president of PKR came for a luncheon meeting at the invitation of Chee Soon-Juan, SDP, who gave a lunch talk, and he said, let's do a Malaysia in Singapore. And the way to do it is to copycat what we did in Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia. We got together, we strange bedfellows came together, and we succeeded in overthrowing a 60-over-years-old mammoth of a coalition. I think the concept was interesting, which I think Dr. Walid spoke earlier. But I also think that the whole idea of bringing, I mean, you can debate it like cows come home, that a foreigner comes in here and tells us, this is the way to bring this government down. How does it go down? How did it went along? I think it's an interesting question by itself. I don't want to answer that, but I think the impetus of that operation, I call it a project or an operation, was very, very fascinating. Of course, eventually it fell through for a whole host of reasons. Okay, and that's why Dr. Tan Cheng Bock went on to build his own party. But the original trigger for an opposition coalition in Singapore came from outside and was driven by one individual, okay, the vice president of the PKR. So that itself tells us actually volumes and so on and so forth. But I'll stop here. How about the rest?
Now, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah. I think just like a small point about when it comes to contesting for the West, right? So, well, I think Ayer Rajah SMC, which was actually a Tan Cheng Bock stronghold, and I think it still is today, despite the PAP having, not say the PAP, but the Electoral Boundaries Committee actually drawing it into West Coast and it being part of Iswaran's stronghold. But it seems that the history of Ayer Rajah as an SMC under Tan Cheng Bock, when Tan Cheng Bock was still in the PAP, has been very, very strong. And you can see that through the 52-48 vote, that there are still residents there, and not even residents within Ayer Rajah, but in the neighboring mini constituencies in Ayer Rajah that are very loyal to Tan Cheng Bock. And that says a lot, that people are not voting for the brand of the party, but they are actually looking out for the person who is behind that branding, who at that point in time was Tan Cheng Bock from the PAP, but now he's the Tan Cheng Bock of the PSP. And more about West Coast, Boon Lay was actually drawn into West Coast this election, and this seems a lot like gerrymandering by the Electoral Boundaries Committee, because Boon Lay was originally voting for Taman. So when you make them vote in a new constituency, they will most likely vote PAP because that is what they are used to. They will definitely vote in Iswaran and Desmond Lee. And therefore, the numbers show that if Boon Lay was not gerrymandered into West Coast, then the PAP would have definitely lost, because even though they were gerrymandered in, the vote it was still 52-48. So that says a lot about, that also tells us a lot about our Electoral Boundaries Committee, where the check and balance is, and how can we ensure a truly fair drawing of the electoral boundaries, because we are the only country in the world who actually redraws our electoral boundaries every election year or so. So this is something that opposition parties have raised up, but I don't think that they will be able to effect any change in the future, because none of them are in ministerial positions, and I don't think the PAP will allow them to go close to it anytime soon.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah, sure, Prof.
Yeah, sorry, my there's something wrong with my laptop. I have to use my phone. So Nell asked the question, where would the checks and balances come from? Because it's true, there is a saying, Frederick Douglass said that power doesn't sit anything without demand. Never has and never will, right? So we cannot expect them willingly to, let's concede this, let's sit this. So it comes from votes. Elections have consequences. Why for the longest time, when I live in Sime previously, and I was in 3 GRCs without ever moving, right? But people tolerated that. People tolerated that, and that's why it could happen indefinitely, right? So if people started becoming an election issue, then there would be change. If not, you shouldn't expect things to change. And as long as, in fact, one of the things that I was looking out for in the election was what happened in Sengkang. Because if what happened in Sengkang, if the PAP had won, it would have shown that such harsh tactics worked. And therefore, you can expect to see more of that in the next election. But because they have shown that it didn't work, probably the PP would not do that. So it's similar for any other issue. As long as voters show that they are comfortable with something, the matter will persist. The checks and balances should come from not just the opposition. It should come from society and voters as well. And in 2015, if you look after 2015, right, the PAP actually passed through a series of unpopular laws. Reserve presidency is the most unpopular of all, but there was also POFMA and Administration of Justice Act. But that was completely expected because in 2015, they got 70%, which was essentially a blank check. When you get a blank check, you cash out the blank check, right? And that is complete, and they are well within their rights to do so, because when you get 70%, right, it's a resounding endorsement of what they're doing. So now they got 60%. They have to measure their movements and actions a little, and it's all about elections because elections have consequences. Yeah.
Relating to this point, I have a point that I would like to sort of raise to the panelists and to all of our audience, because I think from here we can see that relating to the point on redrawing boundaries, how can all parties claim their role as community developers or builders through the formation of their grassroots and town councils if the boundaries keep changing? Because we see it in Marymount, for example, where it's being carved out, and then we have Gan Xiaohuang come out and say that she was going to have Marymount as its unique community that is going to join Bishan Toa Payoh GRC again. So like, I'm not sure here what's going on with all of these parties trying to claim that they're going to build communities when these communities, the boundaries of these communities are very tenuous. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I would say is that is unfortunately the game. And I think it's not fair to the opposition, right? It's not fair. But that is unfortunately the game. And it makes it more difficult for the opposition to have a foothold, for sure, but it's not insurmountable. It's not insurmountable. So what the opposition can do is they take a leaf out of the Workers' Party's playbook, right? They win an SMC, or they work the ground outside of elections. I can tell you that Gerald Giam and the Workers' Party team was walking the ground since 2015 in anticipation of 2020. In fact, some people said that they saw the Workers' Party candidates more than they saw their own PAP MPs for some of them in East Coast, right? And the opposition can do this. Now, the boundaries will change. Yeah, they will change, right? And probably you can sort of guess some of the boundaries that are going to be changed next time round as well. But when you walk the ground, you can walk the ground not just in that particular SMC, but the surroundings as well, right? You have to ultimately play the game as it is. And for the opposition, that is what they have to do.
I like to come in here. Mr. Loh Tia Kiang is a very close friend of mine. We were in the university at the same time. One day, we were attending a funeral of a former Barisan leader. So he was sitting next to me, and I asked him a question. I said, how are you going to beat the PAP when they keep changing the boundaries all the time? And his answer was his classic. And I think Dr. Walid just said, the Workers' Party has a formula of some kind. He said, Mr. Singh, I'm not interested in boundaries as drawn by the PAP or boundaries drawn by the Election Boundaries Review Committee. It's a waste of time. If you want to only work within that area, that constituency, you are going to cry by the time the next election comes. He said, therefore, my party works not on the basis of boundary drawn constitutionally, but the boundary which we operate is a geographical boundary. I'm not interested in what the PAP want to draw. How much can you redraw a geography? He said, I'm from Hougang. I operate in Sengkang, I operate in Punggol, I operate in Aljunied, and then I'm expanding. So I play, I'm not going to go to West Coast. I'm not going to go to Choa Chu Kang. So this has been the Workers' Party strategy. So what they did was using Hougang as a base, and they drilled sideways, up, down, in, out. And that has been a tactic. So no matter where you take Aljunied and where you put Amokyo, where you put, eventually the Workers' Party is so comfortable with that area. But if you want to operate just by that, then you're going to suffer. So I think eventually there's not going to be a day when the Election Commission is going to start drawing a boundary outside Singapore. It has to be within Singapore. So this is where I think the game to be played is how smart the opposition parties become. And if you want to split, you want to be here, there, and everywhere, I think it's going to be very painful for the opposition. Put it another way, I think the opposition parties, forget about coalition, but I think you need to strategize, you need to have tactics and techniques whereby, regardless of the boundary drawing, you are still effective when the boundaries are announced. And I think this is how the WP operates. And whether the other parties can do that or not. I mean, even the PSP, sure, they did well, but look, they were everywhere. We just look at where they went. The same with SDP, the same with RP, and so on and so forth. Not the WP. The WP has a geographical concentration. It is like an artillery fire. When you go to war, you fire in a particular place, heavy artillery fire, so that your soldiers can move forward. That's what the strategy of the WP. Whether this is a Barisan strategy or whatever, hard to tell. But this only became effective by 1980s. So is it a coincidence when the Barisan and the Workers' Party came together? I do not know. But the concentration is amazing. So the Workers' Party will always be mounting their assaults in North and Northeast. North and Northeast. They have not gone anywhere. And the best evidence of this was when the Bukit Batok by-election came in 2016. The first party to announce, I'm not going to be involved, but I'll support the opposition, came from the WP. All the others were talking about left, right, center. Second one, the by-election before this was in Punggol East. Hey, the Workers' Party had been operating there for years, working for so long, and all of a sudden, 4 opposition parties wanted to compete there. Don't talk of 1 or 2, but 4. Eventually, only 3 did. SDP pulled out. And what happened? Even though there were 4 political parties competing, it was only a race between the PAP and the Workers' Party. The other 2 were rejected by the public. So I think the Workers' Party's style and strategy has been concentrate in a few areas and do it well rather than thin out your resources and suffer heavily. So I think that's one way. I mean, the boundaries will be controlled by the Prime Minister's office. We know that. So how do you overcome that? I think there are ways if you think through carefully, and I think the WP has got a formula. I mean, at least that's what Mr. Loh Tia Keng talked about it many years back, and they've been following that to me quite successfully. Thank you.
Okay. Nell, do you have anything? Okay. I have one very interesting question here. So this is posed to all the panelists. What are your thoughts on the importance of the special relationship, quote unquote, between the PAP and the NTUC that has, sort of undergirded the PAP's continued one-party dominance? And what can oppositions do to sort of circumvent this kind of dominance even on the grassroots and even on an institutional level?
Can I go first?
Yeah, Prof. Singh should answer this.
I like to go first. I wrote a book on, somewhere here, I wrote a book on the communist struggle in Singapore. If you read the book, what comes out is that how the PAP actually almost lost power in Singapore because they almost lost control of the labor movement. By 1955, in fact, by 1947, the labor movement in Singapore was in the hands of the Malayan Communist Party, clearly, but underground. clearly. So there was the General Labour Board, General Labour this, General Labour that. Because of emergency, they crushed them, but they continue to operate. Eventually, the most powerful labour union in Singapore was jointly controlled by Lim Chin Siong and Devan Nair. Lim Chin Siong, this is the shop workers union, shop and factory workers union. Lim Chin Siong was the president, Devan Nair was number 2. So Devan Nair is witness to exactly how the MCP will pass instructions to Lim Chin Siong, and Lim Chin Siong will open his cigarette and then burn the paper, and they continue smoking. That's how, and this was taking place at Red Lantern, Shenton Way. So the key is how the labor movement actually played a part in the power struggle in the PAP. In the PAP. The reason why Lee Kuan Yew wanted to join the PAP or wanted the left to join the PAP was because he knew, don't forget, he was advisor to 51 labor unions in Singapore when he was working for Laycock in the law firm. 51. No other man had that position, and no other man had that perspective of who is running the labor movement in this country. He knew it. The British had no control. And hence, once the decision was made before 1954 that I want to set up a PAP, he sent messages to the underground, I want to talk to your bosses. And that meeting took place in Oxley Road basement, and the broker of that meeting was Mrs. Lee Kuan Yew. And came Lim Chin Siong, among others. Fong Swee Suan, among others. I know there are 4 people, Jamie and one more guy, 4 people. Not our Jamie, but Jamie something. 4 people. And that's when the movement took place, because the MCP headquarters said, go, because we are going to take advantage of Lee Kuan Yew and we're going to turn him around so that he becomes our tool and our proxy. Of course, Lee Kuan Yew did the other thing wrong. So my long story is, the labor movement in this country for a long time has always been a highly politicized movement, and where the government always lost control of that movement. The moment PAP came to power, the struggle for power in the PAP was as much in the labor movement as it was outside the labor movement, especially in schools. So today, when we talk of Ong Ye Kang, today when we talk of General Puttachari's father and uncle, today when we talk of Grace Fu, and most importantly, when we talk of Murali, what were their fathers doing? They were all labor leaders. All of them without exception. And they were all arrested the same night, same time, almost. Because they were the labor leaders of the left movement. So, and one last point, eventually Devan Nair shift side and joined Lee Kuan Yew together with G. Kandasamy, and they captured the labor movement. They broke SATU, Singapore Association of, STUC, Singapore Trade Union Congress, from SATU, and made it into NTUC. And they succeeded. By winning that, they won political power. But it is this last line which tells you why this nexus will never be broken. Before I tell you of this line, in 1968, Lee Kuan Yew had a massive labor conference in the Singapore Conference Hall. We were going through a crisis like this current one because the British were leaving. And Lee Kuan Yew started by saying, you are the life and death of the PAP. NTUC is the life and death of the PAP. He started by that. That is first line. But in 1961, Goh Keng Swee was going up City Hall at Padang to see Prime Minister. And Devan Nair was walking down after having seen the Prime Minister. At the steps in front of Padang, Goh Keng Swee told Devan Nair this famous line. Devan, if you lose, all of us will be shot there at the Padang. You cannot afford to lose. For Goh Keng Swee to say those statements, it tells you how the control of the labor movement was actually a life and death struggle for the PAP. It is not something academic, or they have got NTUC chalets, or they have got NTUC fair price. I think this came after. But during that period, whoever won the labor movement won the political struggle in Singapore. Having won that, they will never give it up. Never. Cannot. Because it's part and parcel of their historical DNA. No way. No way. So I don't see them letting go. There's nothing the Workers' Party or anybody can do. You can talk about it. What an irony. Workers' Party has got no control of workers in this country. And yet the Workers' Party is in the hands of the PAP. Sorry, quote, the workers are in the hands of the PAP. And maybe the Workers' Party too. Okay. But I think that history is so critical. The PAP is a very powerful animal of history. The schools were taken over, the universities were taken over by the left. They make sure today nobody who is an enemy will control this place. The labor movement was taken over, nobody must control that. The mass media was taken over, nobody must control that. The civil service was not fully taken over, but the civil service was very pro-British. Stop them so they become pro-PAP. So I think that history is life and death for the PAP. For them, that's oxygen. The day I lose this, I lose power. Hence, they are called parastatal, and why the labor movement cannot be given up. I mean, Dr. Walid said maybe by voting we can take them away. I don't know how we're going to do that, really. Even the PA, because the People's Association is grassroots, they know what the PA did to win the power for the PAP. So because of that experience, I mean, it's still old thinking, it's still old ways of doing things, but it's so critical in the body politics of the PAP. So I think when I was talking about molding, mentoring the new generation, I think these things are going on, maybe not as effectively as in the past. Maybe because of that, maybe one day they will lose. But I think at this very moment, it will still take some time. If you ask me today, who is that one minister who understands the NTUC the best? It's not Ng Chee Meng. I mean, he's flying F-18s, you know. It's not Chan Chun Sing. He was NTUC for a short while and then he came from somewhere else, Baris Sedia and Hentak Kaki, that's all he can do. But the man who understands NTUC, who spent his entire life, adult life, after serving Lee Kuan Yew and Lee Hsien Loong, he spent his entire life in NTUC. Guess who?
Ong Ye Kung.
Ong Ye Kung. It's Ong Ye Kung. That's the man. That's the man whose blood is with the labor movement. That's why I think by putting him into the transport ministry, if you think you're going to fail him, think again. He's going to be so successful there because he knows how to resonate and develop a traction with these people. That's why on Sunday, he was working last Sunday. That's the man. Okay, so I think very good question. I don't think it's enough to answer within a short period, but you are absolutely right. The labor movement will remain. And hence today, we always said since the Lim Chee On in the 1980s, the labor movement was in charge, under the charge of a PAP minister. That minister lost. Never mind, he will still be running the labor movement on behalf of the Prime Minister. We are prepared to break norms, prepared to change traditions, but we are not prepared to lose the control over the labor movement. But one final thing, partly Ng Chee Meng is doing very well. He's a great on the ground, ground to earth, down to earth man, and the labor movement loves him. Okay, but I think that's why he's there. But look, even after losing power, he still kept there. It tells you something. It tells you volumes about how important that particular constituency is. A labor movement and NTUC is about workers. One worker is the man who runs the home. He runs the family. He runs his children. You hurt him, you destroy a home. So this is a very strategic unit, a strategic political unit. You capture it, you capture the country. I mean, they've been doing it so far, so well. Will it remain? I think there will be changes. But I think for the time being, at least from their culture, they're not prepared to give up. And I don't think they will. Okay? Let's see what happens. But sorry for the very long story, because as I said, I've done so much work on these guys. Thank you.
In that case, then what can the opposition do to sort of circumvent this? Like, because we can see sort of the deep-rooted nature of the PAP's control over all of these institutions. So what can the opposition do to go around doing it?
I don't.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I may say, others can come in.
Mm.
You know, the PAP can do whatever it wants, but I think as Dr. Walid said just now, something very deep. The PAP can do whatever it wants. It can, in the name of NTUC, do whatever it wants. In fact, even I'm an NTUC member. Okay, but being a member of the NTUC is not one all and all. There are many other things which are also important. You are trying to tell me the 40% people are not workers? They are workers, definitely. There are many disgruntled workers in these countries. And in a time of crisis, the uncertainty among all of us is so intense and so great. Being a member is important, but being a member doesn't mean I'm pro-PAP, you know. No longer true. No longer true. I mean, anyway, in this country, the party with the hammer is the Workers' Party and not the PAP. You know, but I think they will continue to try to keep the constituency. But at the same time, there are other areas you need to work, especially the soft areas. I mean, you want to undertake political bullying. You want to be a failure in the social media. You want to make the cost of living in this country so expensive. You want to undertake policies like the EP and POFMA. Hey, you're not going to win votes. There is a limit to what you can and cannot do. And I think in this society, there's a limit to what wrong things you can do. I'll never forget Benazir Bhutto, the late Benazir Bhutto's lawyer. You know, I'm a Sikh, we are Sufis. So we went to Baba Farid. What do you call it? Where he stayed, where he died. Okay. And then after that, we went to his human rights lawyer's house for dinner. And then he told me something. He said, you know, Mr. Singh, your country has a fascinating political setup and it's very successful, but I worry for you. Then I was taken aback, quite young. I mean, this is about 90s, 20, 30 years ago, more than 20 years ago. I worry for you. I worry for your country. I said, why? It's the same thing about Warsaw Pact and NATO. He said, whatever you all do is always legal because the party in power controls absolute power in your country. So it's always legal. He said, young man, is it always just? Well, I mean, it hit me like a bolt. It may be legal, but it may not be just. So just is a subjective thing. If I benefit, yeah, great. But if I don't benefit, then I'll say the ranking is bad. I will say PSLE system is bad. I will say the way you give housing is bad, the way you draw your boundaries. So I can go on. So this issue of justness, I think is becoming more and more important. And I think Nell will tell you, the moment the Reza issue came up, I think at first go, you will say, hey, you shouldn't be talking about race and religion in that way. But then, by acting the way they did, people will say, hey, two wrongs don't make one right, you know. And for the younger generation, hey, you make that post 2 years ago. Why come to me now? Oh, then you say, oh, somebody from them complained. I think for people who will say, yeah, they don't trust. So the trust deficit hurts them. And by hurting them, you could see the swing against the ruling party in Sengkang, but not just in Sengkang, actually. In fact, we have not touched this point yet. This election results against the ruling party was not just in areas of where the Workers' Party was. It was across the board. It was across the board 8% swing. A political party established just 3 weeks earlier could get 25% and plus against Dharman. What does it tell you? It tells you something. So it was across the board. It was a national issue. And things like 10 million, NNC MP, the bullying, I think made people, hey, enough is enough. Like, come on, we need accountability. We need checks and balances. So the Workers' Party, make your vote count, became a rallying cry. For the right reason or for the wrong reason, God knows. So I think politics is like that. So we have been through a lot. I still say this is a very beautiful place and I will never want to leave this country. But we want to make it better. I mean, we are sometimes critical, not because we are anti, but I think we want to make it a better place for our children and grandchildren. And I think we can. I mean, you ask me, man, I grew up, sorry, just 30 seconds, I grew up 50 people sharing 2 toilets of a pit system. Not bucket, but pit. And you know the frightening part? It was not the stench. The frightening part was you're sitting down and you're looking up, there's a snake up there. And you run out. You run away. And I scared of snakes since then. I see a snake sitting up there. You run away. And the second thing is, there are 50 homes sharing 1 public bath. You do not know what it means. So we have come from that environment to where we are today. In one house, you got 5 rooms but 6 toilets. Wow, what a transformation. So we have done well, but we want to make it better. And we have done well because they made it well. I mean, let's not take the credit away from them. But at the same time, we can continue to make it better. And then I do not want to go to bed after talking like that. I don't want Shamugam waiting for me outside there and say, off my man, or this man, or that man. I think that should not be the way. I mean, we have grown up well. We are good citizens. We are very loyal citizens. Just because we sometimes criticize, it does not mean we are enemies. We don't look at the PAP as an enemy. We don't look at the opposition as an enemy. We are just trying to push the discourse to a better one. And I think we can. And eventually, it will not be in my hand. Probably it'll be in the hands of Walid's and people like you. And really, if you do it, then my children and grandchildren will have a greater future. And they will not think of migrating. Otherwise, they will. Definitely. I did not migrate. I could have any time. I don't want my kids or my grandchildren to migrate. And why? Because this whole thing will be a nice edifice to live in. Because anywhere in the world I go, I will always be a super minority. Anywhere in the world I go, they will always call me a blackie or a turbanator or a Taliban. You know? Here I'm Mr. Singh. So this is a beautiful place. And I don't want to lose it. And final thing is that you will not know what you are missing until you lose it. Until you lose it. Okay, let's stop of pontification. Let the others get rehearsed.
Prof. Walid.
I know,
Nell.
Prof. Singh has said everything on NTUC.
Okay, Nell. Nothing. Okay, because I received one very, very interesting question from one of our audience. It's about capturing NTUC as a labor union, whether it's important today, because there has been an impression, at least spoken by this member of the audience, that the NTUC is somewhat disconnected from the average worker, and that the union doesn't seem to advocate for as many rights as it used to. One of the more important feature of this is that they are not exactly allowed to engage in worker strikes, the ones that we see, the ones that we see Ong Ting Chong getting in 1988 during the Hendrickson affair. Yeah. So what kind of importance does the PAP see in NTUC today, even though the NTUC doesn't stand for that kind of worker expression, worker political expression, if you will? Yeah.
I have nothing to add on NTUC. I think Prof. Singh has already answered comprehensively.
Yeah. I just like to say something. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we should not look at others and say, why not practice it here? Okay, I think there's a wrong way of looking at things. That's one. Point two, this is a crisis country, will always be a crisis country. And I think those regulations and rules were made in 1968 at a time when we overnight lost 20% of our GDP, overnight. And I remember that very carefully because a few months later, actually, my dad died. My father worked for the British. He was a British soldier. The British, they love soldiers. And even though my dad was a retiree, they never let him retire. They continued. He was fighting. He was a ranger. And make him a driver, make him a logistic man. They just kept him till he died. That's the British. And the moment they left, you could see the crisis in that country, in this country. Okay, and I'm just shifting from primary 5 to primary 6 that period. I think having been through that, and we set up a structure. So this country is a very structured country, a structure whereby we do not want strikes. We want to invite investments and so on and so forth, because at the end of the day, the only thing which we have is how to get $1 after getting $4. That's us, 1 to 4. 1 to 4 is the formula. So that formula have never changed. So I think the reason why at the end of the day, there's always this trade-off that we are not going to allow our workers to strike. It comes from that big picture. But then the bigger question is, to what extent are our workers being given a raw deal? To what extent are our workers being abused by the employers? I don't think we are. I mean, I work in NUS, I have got no union. Am I being abused? I mean, I like to say, yes, I'm being abused. But I think you look at it carefully, I think the deal is relatively a very good deal. And it's across the board. It's across the board. I know many people who are working in the NTUC. The moment there is a trouble, the industrial relations officers will act. They will act. Okay. And because of this tripartite thing, and because of NWC and all that, I think we eventually have developed our own system a la Israel, the formula of maintaining industrial, political, social peace in the country. And I think it's still working. It may not be perfect in every sector. I will not really venture to destroy this system. Not at the moment. I don't think so. I know for sure the gig economy, I know for sure globalization, I know for sure technology have actually exacerbated the rich and poor in the country. I have. But if you take this away, what little advantage which we have will also be lost. Look, like, at the end of the day, how are we going to compete with the Malaysians and the Indonesians and the Thais and the Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Indians and the Bangladeshis? They have cheap everything. So at the end of the day, I think industrial peace is a resource which we have. We don't want to lose. Of course, language is one, discipline is another, clear regulations are another, and so on and so forth. So I think it's still, generally speaking, advantageous to us. We don't want to lose it. Of course, the hope is they will do more for the workers, especially in a crisis. And I think those who are with the NTUC today, I think in a far better position than those who are not with the NTUC in a crisis like this. Definitely. The NTUC is doing so much for them. They're benefited far more than all of us. We in NUS are not affiliated, but those who are with the public and whatever workers, they're getting so much from them because there is. So I think no strike, yes, there's one disadvantage there, but I think you undertake strike in a system which is so badly unjust and run by capitalist hookers and suckers. I don't think our system is like that. Not that bad. Can improve, but still keep. So we have a formula of maintaining what we have, and let's not lose it. Maybe, as Dr. Walid said, and I agree with him, that one way to make the system more responsive is to vote in more people who will fight for us. I mean, you look at James, the way he's talking, it's just not about cockles. He's talking many other things. And I think that is where the formula comes in. Look at the way he's talking about salaries, retrenchment salaries, these redundancy salaries. I think that's the way we're going to go. If tomorrow, after this session, I lose my job within 24 hours, hey, I'll get no money, right? I mean, I cannot become a jaga all over again because I'm overqualified to be a jaga. Then what do I do? I have nothing. So the opposition is talking about helping those who lose their job and this and that. So I think that's where the refinement will come. And I'm quite sure, I mean, I keep saying this again and again to my students, I'm quite sure the 4G will be known as Mr. Welfare. Unfortunately, the US-China trade has come in, the war, COVID has come in, but I think eventually the 4G will turn this country into some kind of a welfare. I think this 100 billion and many other things, the workfare and all that is going to be rationalized. The only debate within the PAP, I know there's a debate, is who's going to pay and how much and how to make the payment. I mean, it's very easy to say, pay me, I also want the money. But, it's not going to be like Donald Trump, just keep printing and printing and printing. And somebody has to pay. And we do not have pressures on China, So he can. So at the end of the day, I think we need, maybe what Ong Yi Kang said is correct. Let's have a public conversation. Let's have a public debate about welfare, but who's going to carry the burden and how long? Because I can get the money, You and your children may have to pay. You want that? It's also not fair. Do we want to in-depth the future generation? That's morally wrong, So I think these are important issues, but I think it will take time. It will not be resolved overnight. Unfortunately, these critical issues of NTUC and the future and the welfare is not going to be resolved because today we have an enemy on the doorstep, which is more dangerous than anything else. So this debate has to be, I think, pushed backward a little bit. But we must revisit the debate when the time is here. Thank you.
Any other inputs from the other panelists? Nell? Okay, we'll move on from the trade union narrative because I have one question who asks about the matters of labor the matters of labor and jobs in Singapore and the bread and butter in Singapore as being the core of politics. So the member of the audience asked if bread and butter issues will continue to be the core of Singapore politics, or the recent election, or as the recent election results sort of suggest, will voters be interested in other more qualitative aspects of governance, maybe in wider policies like climate change and on gender and race? Yeah, will they become the new bread and butter in the future?
Okay, so firstly, I think we need to be careful when we define bread and butter issues versus other issues. What are these other issues? Because for some people, racial equality is part of the bread and butter issue. For some people, gender equality is part of the bread and butter issue. Climate change is an existential issue, especially for a country like ours. So
for me, I'm in East Coast, very dangerous.
So we need to be very careful when we have this false dichotomy at times. I do not necessarily think that these issues are disconnected. That's a thing. Secondly, having said that, I think the elections show that voters care about a lot of things. A lot of us, we are multiple identities all in one, right? The person who votes on racial issues doesn't mean he doesn't want food on the table. Right? A voter who was very uncomfortable with what happened to Raisa Han doesn't mean that he is comfortable with not having a job. It doesn't work that way. So voters are all things in one. So I think all of these matters will continue to matter. Bread and butter issues will definitely matter. And it's not just in Singapore. Any other country, bread and butter issues matter as well. But there will be other issues that matter as well. Now, on climate change, there isn't really that, it wasn't really debated that much. One of the two issues that supposedly that would galvanize the young the most, LGBT issues and climate change, were not really discussed, and they didn't really become hot button issues in this election. They didn't, right? Although there were other issues that were more concerning to the young, such as the nature of politics in Singapore and so on. But you can expect that in the future, that maybe LGBT issues may, into elections time, probably come to the fore more. And partly why these two issues didn't come to the fore is the parties don't really disagree that much on that, especially the PAP and WP don't really disagree that much on it. But the moment there's public movement, or movement in public sentiment, I think the parties will move accordingly as well. Yeah, so that would be my answer to the question.
I just got one thing to say. I mean, I'm born in the 50s. I'm going to die very soon. And the entire life, bread and butter issue will never go away. Really, it'll never go away. Even at this stage, when I'm a Division 1 employee, sometimes we make mistakes, and all of a sudden, oh my God, okay. But I like the analysis of MP Inderjit Singh on this election. I would really like you all to read it. He's a grounded man. He's a very rich man, a very grounded man. And I think he was warning the PAP long ago that you're going to lose a lot of support this time round. Okay. And every generation in this country suffered in its own way. Already was suffering pre-US-China war, economic war, pre-COVID, and came these two double whammies, and wow, okay. So I think bread and butter will always be a major issue. But what is actually making the bread and butter issue so sharp, so poignant today than ever before? I mean, I'm a generation who will come back home, there's no food on the table, you know. I come from that generation. Okay? So, and today we have come a long way off. But what have actually changed today, and we are watching this with our own eyes, and very sadly, is that income disparities have become so sharp. We were all poor at one time. Almost all of us were poor. But I never see people eating food from dustbin. Today I do. Today I do. Okay. And it's very sad. So something has happened. The rich has become super rich. The middle is stuck, and the lower are falling down the crevices. And I think we need to stop that. Okay. So I think when you say bread and butter issue, I think in general I agree. This is one of the most expensive places on earth. I travel a lot. I know how expensive this place is. I hardly buy anything here if I can help it. It's too expensive. But I just wonder how people at the bottom of the totem pole are surviving. I really worry. I really worry. So in COVID, in US, China trade war, and the moment you become jobless, wow, my friends, it's so frightening. So the only thing I pray every day to God is I don't want myself or my children to lose their jobs. It's the most frightening thing. This is the most frightening thing. I don't shy. If I have to work 24 hours a day to lecture, I will still lecture. But I do not want to lose my job. So bread and butter has always been, but it's become sharper because the disparity in the society. But what I'm very heartened, I'm really heartened. Again, as I said, COVID and the US-China trade war have spoiled it. But what has made me very heartened is the 4G. Not the 1G, not the 2G, not the 3G, but the 4G. They know it, and they really want to do something. And as I said, that will be the generation which will distinguish them from the rest. And I think they want to do something very seriously. It's going to be a massive ideological breakthrough. I'm so optimistic and so confident. I think it's coming, and I think it's going to happen once Mr. Heng Swee Keat and team take over power. They cannot do it now. It's very difficult because it'll be embarrassing for too many people. Okay? So I remain confident. I keep talking like that again and again to my students and publicly like this. It's a hope, it's an aspiration, but I think it's also a goal. I want to leave this world knowing if tomorrow my children have got no job, they have a safety net. And I'm really talking of a safety net. And I'm looking for a safety net where if I'm in trouble, I do not have to fill 20 forms to ask for $500. I do not have to fill, I just fill up, I've lost my job. And then something comes in straight away, as quickly as possible, because we are bona fide. So I want the system to improve so that the poverty, it will not disappear, but it must be managed. Because the worst thing you can do in a developed country is to bring indignity to its people. And then you revolutionize the people. Then you radicalize the people because they got nothing to lose. I got a house, I got children, I have everything to lose. I do not want to see this country burn. But the moment you increase this kind of people in society, by our own ill-advised policies, we will lose everything one day. I do not want that to happen. I come from a house which was an ATAP house. I know what it means to burn a house. Today it's a concrete house. But when I say burning, I'm talking of burning. The burning which is taking place in Hong Kong. The burning is taking place in so many other places. That kind of burning we cannot afford. So, bread and butter is the key. If your stomach is full, you have a roof over your head, you have clothes on you, and then let's manage your jobs, we are fine. I'm not asking everybody to be like Donald Trump. Wealth, no. But you can look back and say, hey, I'm okay, man. I can get my McDonald's, I can get my KFC still. And I can still walk. I do not want this all the time to be begging. I do not want this to be a beggar thy society, beggar thy neighbor society. So I think this issue is very important. We are a very rich country. We need to redeploy some of the resources, but let's think through. Sorry, when I talk about poverty, I get very emotional.
Mel? Okay. So we'll go on to the more institutional aspects of being part of the opposition. So going on to the position of the leader of the opposition as the now official leader of the opposition, what do you think would be the strategy of MP Pritam Singh as of now, creating his own, possibly would he create his own shadow cabinet in which they will place special emphasis on specific ministries to sort of scrutinize?
So your question is
Yeah,
whether
it's
what a shadow cabinet or
yeah, whether a shadow cabinet would maybe, you know, be formed up to scrutinize certain ministries.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it might be. It may be. I don't know. I think you would have to ask Pritam that question. But I think it is quite premature actually to expect a shadow cabinet from 10 MPs in the position. When we talk about a shadow cabinet, we are talking about systems, established systems, or two-party systems. And even the leader of the opposition in Britain or in Australia, they are the prime minister in waiting. When there's an election and there is actually a chance of the government losing power. So now to have 10 MPs and to talk about shadow cabinet, I feel that is an unfair expectation on the Workers' Party, on the opposition. I don't know what his strategy is, but if he does do it, he does. If he does decide to do it, that's his choice. But I wouldn't expect that of him. I think it's premature and it's unfair to have that of 10 MPs. And basically, you have all of them essentially. Essentially, each of them is a minister in waiting, if that's the case. Right, and I think it's just not practical at the moment.
If I may, I first concur totally with Prof. Walid. Number two, by the way, leader of opposition should be called Loo, L-O-O, not L-O. Tells you a lot. Number three, I think it's a master strategic distraction by the Prime Minister by talking about Pritam as a leader of opposition. Maybe he's hoping partly to create a division between Pritam and Low Tia Kiang and others. Maybe he wants to create a distraction and a division between Workers' Party and other parties. 10 members, and you're talking of what? What are you talking about? I think as long as you're given the label of the leader of opposition, I think it's fine. But if you expect more, in terms of cabinet, shadow cabinet, I think it's just impractical, and people will start to talk about, wow, what is this guy up to? So in fact, it'll be more damaging for Pritam than anything else. So I think Pritam is not even talking about it.
Right.
In fact, whatever money he got, he's just giving back to people. They're not interested. So I think whatever game they were thinking of has misfired and backfired. All right. So I think the whole game Pritham has at the moment, you think he's worried about becoming a leader of opposition, or is he more worried about being bankrupt and losing his seat in our junior? If I'm Pritham, I'll be more worried about losing my seat because of the town council crisis. And he may just lose his seat. Sylvia Pritham may just lose his seat and we may have a by-election in our junior. I don't rule that out. In the same way, I don't rule out even Raisa Khan going through a period of pain. I don't know what he's going to end up with. Okay, so I think it's a distraction, and the PAP is very good at it. When you're in trouble, create a small crisis, you move at it, or create something that you start looking at it and you don't look at the main thing. So no lah, I don't think shadow cabinet is an issue. He's quote unquote rightfully a leader of opposition, fine. But in terms of what he's going to do, I think it depends on how he and Tan Chien Bock get along first. And basically, they are very good friends. They are very, very good friends, personal friends. I know that for a fact, because I know both of them very, very well. So no issues there. The question is, how do you pull your weight to become effective in parliament will be an interesting thing. Leader of opposition, no. But I have as I said, my bigger worry is in the next 3 to 6 months, will Pritham still be the leader of the opposition if he loses his seat in Aljunied because of that lawsuit, because of the bankruptcy? Okay, and what if we do not have the $45 million to pay the damages, whatever it is? You're bankrupt and you lose your seat. The Prime Minister will say, I respected him. He won 10 seats. I made him the leader of opposition. Alas, unfortunately, they bungle as far as the fiduciary duties and responsibilities are concerned. I'm afraid you have to go. He'll go. He will lose his seat. Hey, this is politics. It's not charity. You know? It's not charity at all, regardless of what has happened in the GE. I mean, if I'm the PAP, you think I want to make the Workers' Party grow? I'll destroy the Workers' Party as much as I can. It is the Workers' Party under Pritham and Low Tia Kiang which took Aljunied from Lee Hsien Loong for 3 elections. And now Sengkang from him. Just imagine the role and place of Lee Hsien Loong in the PAP and Singapore politics as far as the Workers' Party is concerned. You think it's a positive one? And he is in the mood to be magnanimous? There's no magnanimity in politics. That's why I stay away from politics. No, zero. Politics is dog eat dog. So if I'm Pritham, beware, be careful. I think the long knives are coming. Sorry, I come from that school of thought. So no, I think this question is interesting, but the real thing for Pritham is self-preservation. Be it at Sengkang, be it at Aljunied, because I think that's where the thing is happening. And already the telltales are there. They're going to increase the fines, they're going to increase these and increase the costs. Wow. Raising $1 million from the public is okay. Raising 33 or 40 million is not on. It's not going to happen. They will probably lose the seats if this goes to the full swing. Sorry for the pessimism.
Okay, any other takers now?
Okay, I think just very quickly, I think we need to remember that being the leader of the opposition doesn't mean that you are in a ministerial position. Sure. Because these are two very different things, and complain publicly because none of the opposition leaders are allowed to become ministers. Therefore, they don't have the information that they need to create substantial policies. And I think that this is a very real crippling for the opposition, a very real obstacle that they have to overcome. And how they are going to do it when the PAP is still around, I really don't know. And therefore, I think it is because of this obstacle that making a shadow cabinet is sort of useless in that way. Because will it ever be used when the PAP is still around? And even if WP and the PAP, let's say they are 51-49 in the ballot boxes, will the PAP Prime Minister allow the leader of the opposition to become a minister? I don't think so, because it is a strategic loss to them. And so the question that Prof Singh has been echoing is that will the Workers' Party be able to properly establish itself, secure its fundamental base of support, secure and get rid of all the scandals to really entrench itself in Sengkang and Aljunied? Because no doubt the PAP, it is a one-party dominant state, and at the end of the day, it seems that they are using the law to their advantage. And while this may seem to be unfair, I think Prof Singh is right in saying that in there's no magnanimity in politics, and therefore the fundamental question is, will the WP be able to sort of tide through the books that are going to be thrown at them in the next few years? Yeah. With that, we should go on to the next question.
Okay, I have just a few more minutes for maybe a couple of questions. I have one question from the audience asking, very related to the previous question. Beyond just the PAP has talked about expecting the Workers' Party to go beyond complaining, in Parliament, raising as an opposition against their policies and start proposing alternative policies to instead be publicly debated. But the questioner then asked about the conflation of the PAP narrative and equating it to what the citizens want. So based on ground and online sentiments, what do citizens generally expect from the opposition parties post GE 2020?
Okay, so firstly, I want to question the premises of the question. Okay, question the premises of the question. So the first thing is the Workers' Party has done that, has given alternatives. Now you can disagree with the alternatives, and that's fine. That's part of politics. But I think it's unfair to say that they have not. In fact, I would go one step further. I would say SDP has even more detailed proposals than the WP. Right? So it's not true that the opposition has not given. It's only criticizing. And is not giving proposals. Second of all, criticizing or pointing out flaws in the government's policies is a huge part of the opposition's job scope, right? So those are the two things I want to mention first. The second thing is that question itself: what do citizens expect? I mean, there's no one answer, right? It depends on what citizens are you talking about, which citizens you're talking about. The ones that are hardcore pro-PAP, nothing the opposition does will ever be good enough. The ones that are hardcore opposition, the opposition doesn't need to do anything. It will always be the PAP's fault, right? But it's the middle ground that we are talking about. The middle ground which leans PAP, well, I think their votes can go either way, right? This middle ground, I would say maybe 40% of Singaporeans, just a rough estimate. And I think they would want both. They would want alternative proposals and they would want critiques of government policies. And if you followed Parliament, the WP has been doing that, and I think I hope to see more of that from the PSP, and I think that's where I really hope the PSP becomes a proper opposition party and not just a personality based party. So I think that criticism or that line of critique is more apt towards the PSP, or not criticism because they have not been in Parliament yet, or that expectation is more apt being put on the PSP rather than the WP, because the WP would say they have already been doing that and they should just be continuing, they should just continue to do that. The question of access to information, as Nell said, is an interesting one. How much information? Because it seems from what the PM has said that the opposition, the leader of the opposition will get more access to information. But how much more? We do not really know. And we know that there's some access to security briefings, for instance, right? I want to know what exactly that entails. For instance, before an ISA arrest, for instance, right? Would the leader of the opposition be called in by the Minister of Home Affairs and say, look here, we are going to announce, we've already arrested this, we're going to announce this to the public and you would know beforehand, which happens to the cabinet members, right? So would the leader of the opposition get such sensitive information? At the moment, we do not know. We do not know how it's gonna pan out. Now, is the move a magnanimous one? Of course not. It's a political move. Anything politicians do is a political move, right? And Pritam donating is also a political move. He is a politician. You should not expect it to not be a political move. But I think what Pritam did was he seized the media attention. The media attention was about how it was a magnanimous move on the part of Lee Hsien Loong to give him the added salary, but he turned the story around and it became a magnanimous move on his part when everyone was just playing politics. But I think he played it really well when he was sort of pushed in a corner. I think the efficacy of the position of the leader of the opposition really depends on what is, and you know, it is going to be a double-edged sword as well, a sword as well for the PAP, right? And if Pritam later on complains about being denied access to information, it's not going to look good on the PAP as well. So I think we have to watch this space. At the moment, a lot of it is speculation.
I just got one small footnote to add. I think if you look at the opposition's role, you should see it both in parliament and out of parliament. And I think on both counts, the Workers' Party in particular have done fabulously well. The fact that they keep getting voted again and again, regardless of how narrow it is actually a vote of confidence in the WP by the public. And I think by now, the ruling party has come to terms with it. And the fact that even Vivian Balakrishna calls Workers' Party PAP light, actually is a compliment for the Workers' Party.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I think they've done well. They've done well. The fact that Grace Fu tried like hell to get Sylvia Ling to apologize, and I think in Parliament, and she failed.
Yeah.
It tells you how good the WP is. So I think we have a party which is so small, but it's a chili party. It really hits you. And I think this is the kind of party which the PAP do not want to see around for too long. That's my view. They don't mind the kind of Jayaratnam type, you know, it's nice decorations, you know. In fact, they will love to see Kenneth Jayaratnam in Parliament. I think they will love to see Desmond Ling in Parliament. They will love to see the SPP leader in Parliament. Sorry, I got nothing against them, but just telling you. These are the guys they want, but not these fellows who got the brain and the charisma and the caliber and the media savviness. So I think the opposition has done well, especially the WP. And the PSP is too early to say, but probably with the guidance of the boss himself, Dr. Tan, he will go somewhere. They will be cautious, but don't forget Hazel Pua, is not new to politics.
Yes.
She knows, just like Nicole Sia, they are not new to politics. I think these are the kind of people, they're going to transform Singapore politics for the better. The more women they are, the better it's going to be for the good of Singapore. Because the way they approach policy, they can be mean, they can be a wrath of the woman, but yet at the same time, I think they're very, very effective and people listen to them. Sylvia is effective. I think Nicole is effective. I think Hazel is going to be effective. Let's watch what exactly happens. Thank you.
No? Okay, we will go to one last question, since we are generally running out of time. So just one very last question to round up the entire session on the opposition in Singapore. I would like to think of bringing in more sort of comparisons between Singapore's opposition and Malaysia's opposition. So in this case, is there any space for the opposition in Singapore to gain credibility, to gain grounds in credibility, just like those of the opposition in Malaysia?
I think Dr. Walid has answered this question. I don't think you should be comparing apple with oranges. I think that's my first response. Number two, the Malaysian political structure, system, culture is so different. You know, it's race-based and then it's split into whatever it is today. Politicking is a way of life there. And the structure is such that there's politicking over everything. The way the nation was born with Malay politics fighting for Malay rights and so on. So the way they went down that road, we cannot afford to go down the road. I do not want race politics and religious politics to come in here, regardless of how it's played out. So I think the danger of comparing is one. Sure, it looks exciting. Why not Indonesia is even more exciting, which I'm familiar with, even more exciting. And every now and then, every 5-15 years, you have a massive racial riots, a church being burned, a temple being burned, a mosque being burned, a vihara being burned. So I think the danger, a more significant question for me, how is the opposition in Singapore going within the constraints of which they have, short of a split in the PAP? How are they going to make themselves relevant? How are they going to make themselves effective? How are they going to make themselves how are they going to build more bridges with the public so that they are seen as that source of accountability, transparency, effectiveness check, so that we no longer and no more have POFMAs and the EPs and whatever. In other words, we are taken, our voices are taken into consideration. I think that's the kind of politics, because if you think you can go on with this like our parents did or even we did, it's not going to happen. The younger generation will say no with their feet, and that's dangerous. So to me, I think the big question is, I think the opposition need to rethink carefully, strategize how to move forward. And the answer, it doesn't mean it has to be a coalition. I think there are so many other things which needs to be done. And I think Dr. Walid rightfully pointed out with the 3 things he started. I think move along those lines are very, very important. But I go back to my guru now, Walid. Well said. No, well said. I always salute you for what you have been and have done and continue to do. Thank you for coming today. But the floor is yours, please. We give you that last final word. Very important.
Prof. Thank you, Prof. So Nell will have in the spirit of what you said, more women voices. So we'll let Nell have the last say. So I think Prof. Singh has said it very, very nicely, very eloquently. The focus for the opposition, I mean, the way we started off, I think that was already a bit off. Thinking about coalitions is not the right way for opposition growth. The right way is to win an SMC and then build from there, right? And do it the Workers' Party way, or even a GRC if possible, but SMC. And I think the SDP tried to do that. They failed, but they came very close. And that is the right way to do it. And you know, Chee Soon Juan is still in Bukit Batu, right?
Yeah.
And probably you're going to see Bukit Batu SMC disappear next election. But that is the way to go. You continue building your base there. You know, if you had asked me on 9 July, I would say Chee Soon Juan is a liability to the opposition. Now, I'm not so sure. Getting 45%, I'm not so sure. Right? Maybe there is life in him still. So that is what they need to do. Focus on winning small constituencies and then building your base from there. And I think that is what they need to do. Now, just since this is the final round, right, I just wanted to say that for citizens, we should look for checks and balances and accountability beyond the opposition. Opposition, 10% of parliament, 12 MPs, including NC MPs. We don't need to rely on them completely, and understand that the Workers' Party also has a party whip. The Workers' Party also has its own norms and values. And sometimes they may not be able to pursue causes that many people want, or a section of society wants. So we need to look at other forms of checks and balances. The nominated MPs, civil society, just us ordinary citizens, calling our MPs, writing to them, attending Meet the People sessions, going for student dialogues. I know one of the blessings of being an NUS, of having been an NUS student, was that Professor Bilver Singh and Professor Hussain Muttalib always got politicians down for our classes, right? It doesn't happen in NTU, not that much, but it happens in NUS. Go for every dialogue session, raise your concerns. When you see an MP, tell them what you feel. And if you don't, they would really not know what you guys feel. And if people, you know, sometimes you can't blame them for misreading the ground, because Singaporeans are quite polite. No, even if they don't like their MPs, right? When the MPs come, they don't say the things that they really feel, right? And they just say, "Oh yeah, it's good, it's good. It's just that shelter is not. It can be better." When they have 10 other concerns that they, so you are doing everyone a favor when you see your MPs. You raise issues in a polite manner. You can be disagreeable, but in a polite manner. I think there's no harm at all in doing that. So I think the checks and balances can and must exist outside opposition parties and and we must also call opposition parties to account. It's not just that the PAP that needs to be called to account. We must also call the Workers' Party and the other opposition parties to account as well. So that's all. And thank you for inviting me, Winston.
Thank you.
Nell,
Yeah. So
ending
thanks
off.
for Khalid and Prof Singh. Indeed, we should have more female voices in Parliament. Yes. So on the issue of representation, not only are we seemingly moving towards a more gender equality emphasis in Parliament, in which we have Hazel Pua, Sylvia Lim and Nicole Seah, but also that we should remember that fundamentally this country, its politics involves race and religion down to our very roots. So the observation that people have not voiced out on social media, but especially of the Indians who are a minority in Singapore here, is that the PAP actually did not put up any Indian candidates this election.
New Indian candidates.
Yeah, new Indian candidates, correct. So, but contrary to that, the opposition actually put up quite a few minority candidates. And I have done some research on this, and it shows that the trend line is basically that the opposition is including more minority candidates, whereas the PAP, it seems to be on a decline. So when we look 5 years from now, who are the Indian political candidates from the PAP that are left? And why is it that the PAP decided to not put any new Indian candidates this round? Did they think that they could get away with it? Or did they think that, oh, we have enough Indian political candidates in Parliament, therefore we don't need any, which I think for lack of being polite, right, I think it's just bullshit, because we are a multiracial country, and in every election we should have a good representation of every single race and religion inside our parliament. It's very, very important to keep the multiracial and religious society that Lee Kuan Yew has so long envisioned. And on the issue of misreading the ground, indeed, the MPs, if you don't, it's like having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you know. If you don't tell them what you want, they also won't know, and therefore, like, there's a lot of miscommunication that happens between the two of you. And therefore, if in the same way, if you don't tell the MP what you want, and if you're polite, yeah, I think the hawker center is very nice, you did a good job renovating it, then they really won't know what you want. So it is true that whenever that Prof Singh or Prof Walid, they might invite the politicians to come down and give a talk, you should voice out your concerns as much as possible, and even in a polite manner, in a polite and respectful manner. But there should be progress in the discourse that is going on between especially younger voters and these politicians, especially of the PAP, who have been out of touch with us for so long. And on this other issue, I believe that there is a need to revamp the grassroots system, because, as we say, Singaporeans are so polite. If the MPs come to our house and they can't force us to talk, then what then? I think we should actually look online, because social media is a good platform that provides anonymity that allows us to remain anonymous, and then people are braver, more genuine to actually express their opinions behind the screen. And this is something that perhaps the grassroots organizations or the PAP themselves can look into. And this is something that opposition has been very successful in doing. As you can see, just look at Jameis's Instagram or Nicole Seah's Instagram. So many comments on Instagram and their Facebook. It is amazing compared to the PAP, where you usually get generic comments like, "Oh, you are doing a good job, sir," and that's about it. They don't really raise their criticism and it comes back to the element of fear that POFMA has created in this country. So other than we should really, what the PAP or the government should be doing is looking at how they can reconnect with the people, and especially when it comes to addressing the pertinent issue of why we still cannot have a non-Chinese prime minister is the question that younger voters are now asking. And with that, Winston, back to you.
Sorry, can I just say something? Because Nell
Yeah,
said
sure, Prof.
Nicole said Instagram.
Sure,
Yeah,
Prof.
Nicole said just followed me on Instagram. That's all I just wanted to say.
Prof, you want to put your Instagram handle? Then we get everybody to. Okay. So with that, we have actually come to the end of the session. So thank you so much, Prof, for coming down. You have been a great help to our sort of discussion, cultivating this discussion. And I think what the panel has said is very true. We need to start cultivating the idea of the idea that political discourse is not a battleground where your citizens are being put against whatever forces that are out there. Ultimately, it's at the end of the day, you are just working together to build a better future for your country. So it's a cooperative thing rather than a competitive, event where everybody, has a stake in. Yeah. So before we end the session, actually, I would like to remind everybody again about the NUS PSOC membership sign up form. If you would like to join us for future events such as this one, you can sign up by scanning the QR code here or typing this URL in your browser. And in response to the episode today, there's been a lot of interesting points that have been raised during this episode. So I would like everyone to spend about 30 minutes to an hour rethinking about these points, and then maybe coming up with a letter to the editor to sort of raise your opinions and your questions to the panelists for tomorrow. So you can scan the QR code on the screen or go over to www.censussgp.wordpress.com/census90% to read the rules on submitting letters to the editor. Yeah, to submit your letters to the editor, you can send them over to the publications email at publications@nuspsoc.org. And for inquiries about census, you can email me again at events@nuspsoc.org. And with that, I would like to end the session now. Yeah. So
thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
thank you.
Walid,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
good show. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see you all soon. Huh? Take care.
Okay.
Keep safe.
Bye. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.